Welcome back to our ongoing studies in the Gospel of Matthew. I hope life is treating you well and things are going well for you. I appreciate your support, your encouragement, and your help in these videos. And if you like this video, provide a like for the video and subscribe. This is for you. We are going to be looking at Matthew chapter 26, verses 47 to 49, and I'm going to be reading out of the New King James Bible. Matthew chapter 26, verse 47. And while he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, with a great multitude, with swords and clubs, came from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now he who was betraying him had given them a sign saying, whoever I kiss, he is the one, seize him. And immediately he went up to Jesus and said, greetings, Rabbi, and kissed him. We are in this passage in a very different age. Now, understand, this is a passage that can only happen back then in a sense. We live in a day and age when we have photographic imprints of people. We live in a day and age of security cameras. There's parts of the world where, the security cameras are such in a city center that they can basically track an individual. Say, for example, a crime is committed. They can go back into a series of video cameras and recount the steps that were involved in that crime. In other words, they would have an exact idea as to who they were after and who they were looking for. Jesus was a known entity. We recognize that. Jesus was creating a buzz among the people. Jesus had people who followed him. And all of this, people did not know what Jesus looked like. That's the upshot of why Judas is in this story. Because understand that even though Jesus was a celebrity in a sense of a certain order, people did not know who he was. Contrast that to the latest A-list Hollywood celebrity, and they're plastered all sorts of areas. I turn on the internet or computer and fire up the internet, and I find them on my web browser, say, for example. Or I go stand in the grocery store, and I can see in the magazines that are there, their faces there. I can, go to a television, watch some television and maybe find a show advertising them there. In other words, we become very familiar with who people are, even though we may not really care to know who they are. And in that sense, Jesus lived in a very different age. People did not know what he looked like. You put Jesus in a lineup and ask people to identify who Jesus was, and I suspect many people would not have been able to. Now, of course, the other thing is the darkness of the evening also leads to the difficulty of the task. They might have had a rough idea as to what Jesus was like, but in the darkness without electric lights, even more difficult. Now, the above paragraph is important for putting Judas in the story, but it's also important for what also transpires after this event. How is it that the apostles were able to, after Jesus' arrest, disappear, as it were? Well, the city of Jerusalem was in the midst of the celebration of the Passover feast. Among the many who would have made the pilgrimage to Jerusalem would be Galileans. Now, the only apostle that might not have been from Galilee is Judas Iscariot. So a band of Galileans would have had no problem disappearing in the city of Jerusalem in the Passover season because there were a lot of other Galileans to begin with. And the fact that there were no photographs and no, handouts or wanted posters that could be posted means that they were able to disappear in the crowd, and people would have been, in that sense, been none the wiser to who they were. Remember, too, that Jesus spent the majority of his ministry seemingly in Galilee. And so his apostles would not necessarily have been well known in Jerusalem. The only caveat or exception I would put to that is if you go to John's gospel, there is some reason to believe that John had some connections in Jerusalem. But otherwise, it seems they were not. The authorities, with the arrest of Jesus and no mugshots, would be content to let the apostles scatter. The apostles were, at the end of the day, totally irrelevant. It is interesting to note the way in which Jesus approaches his arrest and the way the authorities approach it. The people coming to arrest Jesus were fully armed. Implied in this is that they were prepared for confrontation. Notice it was not the religious leaders themselves that came. It was the thugs employed in their service who were there to do the dirty work. These were not men chosen for their religious point of view. If you catch my drift, they were men who are ready to establish their authority as necessary. This really shows, I think, in a way, how little the religious authorities understood who and what Jesus was and what he was about. They sent the thugs. The goon squad has arrived. They were only able to see Jesus from how things worked in their world. They, even in that moment, showed how much they were in the dark when it came to who and what Jesus was about. The darkness, the fact that these were men from Galilee, and that seemingly there was nothing about Jesus that would make him stand out, required Judas Iscariot. Judas takes a despicable task that he did and ratchets it up a whole new level. His signal to the armed retinue is that I will greet Jesus with a kiss. Now we understand in that part of the world at that time, and even still, a kiss between men is a sign of an affection. There's nothing wrong or inappropriate. Judas, though, in a show of intimacy, is willing to betray his friend. He is willing to take an act of care and concern and, as it were, throw it in the mud. Judas is not simply betraying his friend. He is saying, I no longer care for you. Get out of my life. And that final act to Judas seals his rejection of Jesus and his message. Judas, in that moment, seals his fate for all eternity. There is now nothing left for him to do.